You fly to the tropics, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, Zanzibar, or the Seychelles. What's the first thing you're gonna do? Well, for a lot of us, living out that beachside fantasy means you grab a seat by the ocean and order something made from coconut. Maybe it's a pina colada, a bowl of curry, a sweet dessert, or even just the coconut itself, cracked open and served with a straw and a spoon. It's the symbol of paradise, the flavor of the islands, and it's literally the taste of a good time. But for the people who live in that climate year-round, it's so much more than just a treat. Throughout history, it's been a source of water, of firewood, of fiber for making rope, and of the means to sustain an entire society. For thousands of years, its arrival in a new place has been met with religious celebration, creation legends, and of course, a reinvention of local cuisine. So today we're following the story of the coconut, tracing its spread and its impact on both ancient and modern life, telling its wildest stories, and of course, tasting as much as we can of the definitive flavor of paradise. In 1883, on an Indonesian island in the Sunda Strait between Sumatra and Java, a massive volcanic eruption would shake the ground with such intensity that its reverberations could be felt across the entire planet. It triggered a tidal wave that capsized boats in South Africa and the English Channel, and the sound alone could be heard within a radius of more than 3,000 kilometers. Within 3 days, almost the entire island of Krakatoa was gone, sunk into the ocean along with the other landmasses that once made up an archipelago. And that would be the end of the story for more than a generation. But 44 years later, in 1927, seismic activity in the Sunda Strait began again. Before long, another eruption would take place, this time not destroying an island, but creating a new one. A landmass that would be named Anak Krakatau, or Child of Krakatoa. The island, of course, was barren, made of volcanic rock that would harden into the very beginning of a land formation. So it was quite a surprise in 1929 when researchers arrived on its shores and found one plant already thriving. That, of course, was the coconut. The reason why I bring this up first is that this was an irrefutable demonstration of something researchers long assumed, which was that coconuts can spread across long distances by themselves, floating along with the ocean current, and wherever they wash up on shore, they can start to take root. In other words, there's no way for us to say exactly where the first coconut came from. It's impossible. They float. The reason it's important to say that up front is that coconuts today are one of the most beloved items in the entire culinary world. There are a lot of claims about who gets credit for being the first to crack one open and drink the water, to soak and strain the meat into coconut milk, or to add it into curries or desserts, or anything else made better by putting in some coconut. But separating fact from fiction when it comes to this ingredient is really, really hard. The oldest coconut fossils, or at least the fossils of something round and hard-shelled, have been found by archaeologists as far apart as New Zealand and southern India. Botanists say it came from Papua New Guinea. Linguists trace it to Southeast Asia. And anyway, none of this matters because, again, they can float. By the time the first humans walked the planet, coconuts, or at least some distant relative, might have already been in all of these different places. But that doesn't mean that we can't find some answers. For the sake of this video, we're going to follow one specific plant, a tree called the Cocos nucifera, the coconut you know, and the one that would change the world. And with that, let's start our story at the very beginning of the recorded history of the coconut. Walking through a Southeast Asian market, in this case just north of downtown Bangkok, everything sold has its own legend. There are street foods that trace back to the ethnic Mon, the native Thai, the Chinese, Malays, Indians, and a dozen forgotten cultures and dynasties. But if we're really looking for history, the oldest thing served, the staple that would be recognizable to the earliest time travelers, would most likely be this: the humble coconut. hacked open and served as a refreshing hot weather drink. The type of coconut served in this part of the world is known as the Niu Kafa, and it's this plant that doesn't just tell the story of the settlement and exploration of much of the tropics, it enabled it in almost every conceivable way. Now, while we might not know the origin of the plant itself, we can definitively mark the time and place it was first domesticated, first planted and selectively bred for the best traits, and it was here in Southeast Asia, actually about 1,500 miles away from Bangkok in the Philippines, sometime after 3000 BC. Before then, much of island Southeast Asia was only sparsely inhabited by indigenous hunter-gatherers, but that would change with the arrival of the so-called Austronesians, who landed in the Philippines on boats from Taiwan about 5,000 years ago. They'd build the first permanent settlements on the islands, and even today, their descendants make up the majority of the country's population. Now, the Austronesians are known to the history books as some of the world's great seafarers, the ocean-exploring super-civilization that would settle lands far and wide and leave a colossal imprint on the modern world. And it is true that their proficiency on the water brought them from China to Taiwan and Taiwan to Luzon. But they didn't arrive in the Philippines as explorers. They arrived as rice farmers, and for the first 1,500 years after settling the islands, that's more or less how they'd remain. But something in those 1,500 years would change the Austronesians. Something would open up the vast oceans to their exploration and send them almost all at once to the farthest corners of the known and unknown world. You can probably guess what that was. In the Philippines, the Austronesians encountered the coconut, and it would be their discovery of every use of the plant that would come to define their impact on society. They drank the water, of course, and they probably ate the meat, too, although that's just a guess. What we do know for a fact, however, is that they burned the husks as firewood. They made rope from the fibers of the shell, made the shell itself into tools and implements, and when their villages grew into cities, they domesticated the coconut, planting the tree wherever it would grow and crossbreeding for more useful characteristics. And one of the reasons their cities grew at all was that because of the coconut, the Austronesians found a way not just to stay hydrated, but to preserve food, to keep protein from spoiling even in tropical conditions. And that technique of fermenting both the water and the sap of the coconut into vinegar created not just a means of survival, but formed the foundations of a cuisine. In fact, it's a cuisine that in the Philippines, the old home of the Austronesians, still exists today. This is a restaurant called New Mabuhay, a place we visited once before on the channel and one of Bangkok's only restaurants serving home-cooked Filipino food. That was the video where we also brought up the huge amount of influences that would change the cuisine, but at the heart of everything is the technique of pickling something in coconut vinegar. It's the origins of adobo. Long before foreigners brought soy sauce and braising techniques, it was a simple dish of preserved pork. And today we're here for a plate of kinilaw, fish, typically Spanish mackerel, cooked in coconut vinegar, maybe the oldest single dish we know in Southeast Asia, an influence on today's Central American ceviche, and in the modern days, enhanced with things like chili, onion, and often coconut milk and toasted coconut. Well, apparently I didn't learn my lesson last time that coming to a Filipino restaurant, especially this one, and asking for we just need one thing, just a small plate, just so I can show the use of coconut vinegar. Of course, now I am overloaded with food, and there's no such thing as coming here and not being welcomed like family, which means having a gigantic meal. So interesting, just kind of thinking about like coconut. We think of coconut as a way to make a dish sweeter, you know, or rounder or thicker. In this case, it's not sweet, it's not thick. The coconut is a preservative, which, you use the coconut vinegar. Some of my favorite versions of this in the Philippines, you'll also use some desiccated or dried coconut for texture. All right, so we pick up in the Philippines with the first cultivated coconut trees. And it didn't take long for the Austronesians, with the ability to preserve food through making vinegar, a portable source of fresh water, wood made from coconut trunks, and rope made from the husks. Well, they got back on the water, and this time, they could go as far as they wanted. Their exploration would establish contact with distant empires and spark a network of trade that would forever change Asian culture and cuisine. And along with trading far and wide, they'd also settle distant islands. Malaysia and Indonesia, Polynesia, Hawaii, New Zealand, Madagascar. And all of this done by crossing oceans sustained by coconut water and meat preserved in coconut vinegar on boats that were themselves made using parts of the coconut. Now, we already mentioned that coconuts themselves can cross oceans by floating on the water, so we can't be certain that they weren't already there in at least some of these places when the Austronesians arrived. But there are a few reasons to believe that that wasn't the case. First, there has been modern testing of how far a coconut can actually float before it's no longer able to sprout a new plant, and the best guess is about 7 weeks. More than enough time to get from Sumatra to Krakatoa, but given the inconsistency of ocean currents, on the open water it might not get too much farther than that. Second, the genetic makeup of coconuts found along the path of the Austronesians matches the domesticated version introduced in the Philippines. And third, there's the language. We know the Austronesians found coconuts in the Philippines because in the indigenous Taiwanese language, which came from the Austronesians, there isn't a word for coconuts. But then in the Philippines, all of a sudden we start to see references to something called the Niu. And then as they started to travel, well, the word did too. And that tells us not just where the Austronesians went, but where they spread the coconut. In an office building in Bangkok's Siloam might be the only nasi padang lunch counter in all of Bangkok. The North Sumatran style of eating that on the island might showcase dozens upon dozens of tastes and flavors, textures and colors, many incorporating use of the coconut. Here it's a toned-down selection, but oh my goodness, am I excited to find this in my home city. Indonesian food is not as sweet as Thai food in general. So you get a different kind of side of the flavor of coconut because this is intensely coconutty, but maybe lacking the sweetness you find in a Thai version of coconut curry. It's not worse, it's different, and it all depends on your own palate. But man, this is so cool to find this here. Man, can you get a close-up? I want you to zoom in on this. I'm just gonna show you how much this meat falls apart when I push down with the spoon. And you see, I'm not cheating, I already did that on my own. So I'm gonna take this part of the meat and I'm just gonna push it down, and you see, it just broke like that, and it falls apart. It's dry, it looks dry, it is dry, But in 7 hours of cooking in coconut milk, along with a ton of spices, it all absorbs and cooks into the meat. So you end up with this, just meat itself tastes like coconut, along with, I mean, the list of spices is this long that you have to use to make beef rendang. It's my favorite thing to cook because I get, when I'm not cooking in a restaurant, when I'm at home, it's zen for me. I like to just put music on, crack open a beer, and then just cook. And this is 7 hours of stirring. You're just watching it, you're stirring. You can do a couple other dishes on the side in the meantime. You can make this a little faster if you do smaller portions, but why would you make a smaller portion of beef rendang? You want this stuff will keep forever, and so you might as well make a lot of it. Although somehow it's never lasted us more than 2 or 3 days. Alright, I'll make this part short, but let me quickly explain what a coconut actually is. It's not really a nut, but then neither are cashews or almonds, both of which are related to the coconut. See, they're all members of a family called drupes, which are fruits that produce some kind of a hard material along with a protective flesh. Drupes encompass everything from peaches and mangoes to olives and even coffee, all of which evolved from a common ancestor over millions of years to adapt to various conditions, and some drupes are closer to the coconut than you might think. For example, the coconut plant is a palm tree that grows in a climate range of between 20 and 32 degrees Celsius, or 68 to 89 Fahrenheit. It needs access to lots of water and the kind of soil that allows fast absorption, like, for example, beach sand. And because of those conditions, instead of developing a hard seed on the inside meant to be spread by birds or mammals, it evolved a shell on the outside so it can float on water. But the same plant just a bit further inland, in the same temperature range but in drier climates and without access to ocean currents. Well, over the course of history, that became something else altogether: the date palm. Coconut trees can grow as high as 30 meters tall, with wood considered just as sturdy as the stuff found in forests, and it's fast growing, as much as 2 feet per year. A typical coconut reaches maturity in about 6 to 10 years, producing around 30 fruits every 12 months, a number that can reach as high as 100 over a lifetime that can stretch more than a century. And with that, let's get back to the path of the coconut. From the time the Austronesians arrived in the Philippines, for almost 2,500 years, the story of the coconut is pretty straightforward. We have fossils, genetics, and even language to guide us along the path. But at some point between the 7th and 4th century BC, the Austronesians would encounter coastal India, and that's when the story, well, it gets a lot more complicated. Now, we know that the Austronesian traders brought their domestic coconut and it was accepted by the Indians. I mean, back to the word Niu, it's the root of Hindi's nariyal, which itself comes from Sanskrit, first recorded around the time of those encounters, about 300 BC. But remember I said in the open that tracing the origins of the coconut was not so simple, and there are a lot of questions about what the Austronesians actually found when they arrived in the subcontinent. Which brings us to the next part of our story. To start, we begin again with language, and as with so much in ancient India, with religion. The first written record of the coconut recorded in Sanskrit was in the Mahabharata, first put on paper around again 300 BC and actually referring to coconuts with 2 words, Narikela, the root of Nariyal, and also Kalpa Vrishka, which means a tree that provides all of the necessities of life. Now, it doesn't necessarily change anything in our timeline, but the coconut by the time of this writing was, in India, venerated, sacred, and it had its own non-Austronesian origin stories. According to Hindu tradition, the coconut palm was created by the Brahmarshi Vishwamitra, one of the great sages of ancient India. The short version is that the legendary King Satyavrata was literally thrown out of heaven for entering while in human form. So Vishwamitra used his power to stop his friend's fall by constructing a wooden pole. And as such, coconuts were created to resemble King Satyavrata himself, with the black spots representing his eyes and the fiber his hair. There are other origin legends from different Indian kingdoms and cultures. One gives credit to Parshuram, the sixth avatar of Vishnu. In that story, Parshuram set out to create his own paradise, so he stood at the edge of the water and threw his axe. This formed what we call Kerala. The first thing he created for his new land was the coconut, and that's why to this day the name Kerala translates to the land of coconut trees. There are also stories that say that coconuts began when the ancient Lord Kulavanangisar took the form of a coconut tree to provide nourishment to a pregnant woman who was hungry and thirsty. And many ancient legends write that the goddess Bhagavati herself is the soul of the coconut palm. Across India, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives, as far back as the written record, coconuts are used in religious offerings, planted outside homes, venerated as sacred, and most of all, said to be endemic to the subcontinent. In India, the idea that coconuts were not introduced but are actually native is widely believed today, at least within local culture. It's even said that Harappans were using coconuts 1,000 years before this story even began, although that's probably nonsense since it's based on the discovery of one round sculpture. I mean, it could be a basketball. But still, where there's smoke, there's burning coconut husk fire. Here's what we know. There are two types of coconut, two varieties of Cocos nucifera that today can be found in different parts of the world. The Niu Vei, native to the Philippines, and one called the Niu Kafa, which is what would, starting around the 1st century AD, travel farther abroad with Indian traders. They both come from the same plant. Niu Vei bred to produce more water, better for long ocean voyages, and Niu Kafa with more meat and a thicker husk, better to use for building materials and cooking into coconut milk. The Niu Vei was what the Austronesians introduced to India. But within a couple hundred years, at the most, at least according to conventional history, Indian traders spanned the globe carrying Niu Kafa. Something doesn't make sense. There would seem to be two more likely possibilities. First, the Austronesians came much earlier than previously believed, and over time, Indian farmers cultivated their own domestic breed to suit local needs. This would explain not just the word new in local language, but also another word, ten, the root of the name for the coconut in most South Indian dialects, which translates more or less to something that arrived from the south. Or second, by the time the traders arrived in India, their Filipino coconuts would simply be introduced to a culture that was already making extensive use of their own native strain, one that, like the date palm, had evolved on its own millions of years earlier, and which was very much endemic to the Indian subcontinent. Anyway, let's try some Niu Kafa. If you followed this channel, you have seen me making excuse after excuse about how we can find a way to come back and film here again. We didn't make it in our Pratunam video. This was where we did one of our very first OTR videos ever. Nobody saw it when we cooked with Chef Manel and learned how to make this, which is dal, or the Sri Lankan version of dal, which is a lentil curry. However, today, now, the story of the coconut, it's a great chance to come back here. So 3 things on the table other than rice. We have coconut sambal. Coconut in Sinhalese is called pol. So this is pol sambal. This is the big revelation to me of Sri Lankan food. This thing is like, I mean, we filmed the making of it, but it's like, it's coconut, and then it's pounded or mixed with, citrus, a little bit of sugar, onion, chili, and it is incredible. It is the most addictive side dish you can possibly imagine. You do it with everything in Sri Lanka. Whenever Daria and I come to Pratunam, which is where we are, we It doesn't matter where we go to eat, on our way home, we stop here and get at least this to take with us. And then we have the pol roti, which is a bread made from coconut. And that's all. This is we didn't overdo it because we still have another stop today, and we've been eating. And normally I would order stuff that would cover the table here, but Sri Lankan food talk about a different and fascinating use of the coconut in savory and sweet applications. The thing about coconut is I think a lot of people don't really know what it tastes like. And I don't mean that as an insult, but I mean, it's one of those things that if you know, normally 9 times out of 10 when you find it, it's got sugar added to it. You know, in a packaged coconut milk, in a coconut cake, in something that's, well, the flavor of coconut is really the flavor of coconut plus sugar. And one thing that I really love about Sri Lankan food is that, and some applications in Thai food, although it's really well done in South India and Sri Lanka, is coconut that tastes like coconut, you know, and it's not necessarily something that only needs to be applied in sweeter applications. This is just awesome. The history of the coconut in the Indian subcontinent is fascinating, but perhaps even more important is what happened starting around the 1st century BC, when Indian traders took the place of the old Austronesians as the new global ambassadors of the coconut. Now, if you watched our video about curry, you'll know what happened just a short time later. The Indians began trading almost exclusively with the Arabs, who in turn became astronomically wealthy, selling Indian spices everywhere. And of course, not just spices, but coconuts as well. Now, unlike dried cardamom and black pepper, coconuts had a somewhat limited market. Remember, they can only thrive in certain conditions, pretty much only found between 26 degrees north of the equator and 26 degrees to the south. But there were markets within the Arab spice trade that fit the needed criteria. For example, North Africa, which is why a long time later Marco Polo would name the Sumatran coconut the Pharaoh's nut, named after the plant that he already knew from Egypt. The Arabs would introduce the coconut further south along the African coast as well, and they'd find a market in the Persian Gulf, especially the countries of Oman and Yemen, who used it to make their own boats called dhows, modeled after the Arab vessels which themselves were derived from those from India, using coconut fiber to tie coconut wood planks together with no nails needed. In fact, it was in Oman where another legendary traveler, Ibn Battuta, wrote about his own encounter with the coconut. In his writing, he used the Arabic name, which is still used today, given to the coconut by those in the Middle East, Juzat al-Hind, or the walnut of India. Well, that's one of the Arabic names. Another is the nariyal, which comes from Hindi's nariyal, itself derived from the Austronesian Niu. By the way, since we bring up the Austronesians again, let me just quickly spend one moment talking about their legacy. Because while the Indians and Arabs were sending coconuts to the Red Sea, the coast of Africa, and the Persian Gulf, the coconut would have an enormous impact on life throughout the South Pacific, where it had arrived from the Philippines. It's not hugely relevant to this story, but it does feel incomplete to make this video without acknowledging that side of the world. Because by this point in history, life was thriving in the tropics, and a big reason why was, of course, the coconut. We talked about the Indian legends of the creation of the coconut, but in the South Pacific, they also developed their own canon. For example, there's one popular one involving a Fijian king who fell in love with a girl named Sina. The king transformed himself into an eel, swam to her island, and professed his adoration. But before she could respond, the girl's parents saw the eel talking with their daughter, and in a fit of somewhat understandable anger, cut off his head. The girl was heartbroken and buried the head in the soil where it would sprout a coconut tree, and from then on, whenever she would take a drink from a coconut, she would be kissing the king. And that's just one version of that story. There are dozens of variations from Polynesia to New Zealand. In Hawaii, folk songs sing about the coconut, with one ancient ballad still well known in the present day called Niu Olahiki, or O Life-Giving Coconut That Came to Us from Tahiti. The islands of the South Pacific would give the world a new variation of coconut called the Niu Leka, or dwarf coconut, which was most likely domesticated in Tonga. And they'd give the world the names that we still attach to the most popular varieties, Niu Vei and Niu Kafa, which are taken from the language of Samoa. Anyway, between the Austronesians, the Indians, and the Arabs, by the 15th century AD, coconuts could be found throughout much of the Old World tropics, which brings us to the age of exploration. The story of the Columbian Exchange is pretty well known. It's the period of time starting in 1492 where New World ingredients, things like chili peppers, tomatoes, and potatoes, found their way to the other side of the ocean. We've covered this many times before, but until now on the channel we've generally focused on the stuff headed east. But the Columbian Exchange was an exchange, and plenty of Old World ingredients traveled west too. That would include things like livestock, like horses, pigs, and cattle, plants like coffee from Ethiopia and Yemen, sugarcane from India, citrus from Southeast Asia, and of course, coconuts. If you watched our video on the chili pepper, you might remember that we can identify the routes taken by the Spanish and the Portuguese by what varietals they took from the Americas. It's the same way the other way around with coconuts. In this case, the Spanish had a direct link from the Philippines, the home of the Niu Vei, by way of their galleon trade route from Manila to Acapulco, Mexico. Through that trade, they introduced the Austronesian coconut to the west coast of the Americas, as far north as California and as far south as Peru. The Portuguese, on the other hand, took their coconuts from India, which meant they loaded their boats with Niu Kafa, delivering those to the West Indies, the west coast of Africa, Brazil, Venezuela, and Latin America. And they'd also end up in what's now the United States after one of the boats overturned after leaving the island of Trinidad. Don't forget the main theme of this video: coconuts can float. So in no time, a few thousand Niu Kafa drifted to shore in Florida, landing in a place that we now call Palm Beach County. And that's why today, the United States of America has two coasts lined with two completely different strains of coconut. Now, even though coconuts don't grow in much of Europe, the Portuguese did introduce the plant to the continent, although it could only be sold in dried form, which is why most recipes there are for things like cookies or pastries. But perhaps Portugal's most important and lasting contribution, at least for this story, is the name coconut. That term was first used by the Portuguese around the year 1500, depending on who you believe, either derived from coco, meaning monkey, or cocoruto, which translates to the top of the head. And while coco is more widely accepted, there are those who say that it's not just the other one, but that it was personally coined by the famous explorer Vasco da Gama, a noted admirer of the coconut. This is a place called La Mia. It's a small restaurant hidden behind Bangkok Hospital and the brainchild of Su, short for Surasada, a Thai woman who fell in love with Portuguese food while traveling across Europe. She spent years learning recipes and finally quit her job as an IT manager in Germany to instead bring her favorite cuisine back to her home country. Do you think that, when you look at, again, my channel is food history. There's so much contributions that the era of exploration, the Portuguese trading ships had to changing food all over the world. And in Thailand, the Portuguese brought egg-based cooking. Portuguese brought, as you said, from the New World, chili peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, all kinds of things like this. But Portuguese food is unknown.
True.
Right? Does it make you happy to introduce Thai people to Portuguese food? Because there's such a connection between Thailand and Portugal.
Yes. Many Thais are very surprised when I tell the story, and I'm happy they know that. I'm happy that they start realizing that we are connected to Portuguese people from very, very old time. But now it's faded. But I hope through me they starting again a little.
I'm just gonna sneak some. How should I eat this? I just put some in a bowl, I guess. Yeah, and then use that to kind of dip some bread and.
True, you know how to.
There's a spoon. I have a bowl, I have a spoon, and I have a bunch of food. Around the year 1895, a German man named August Engelhardt would find himself immersed in a movement called life reform, which sought to honor God by eating only raw, whole foods. But Engelhardt took it even farther, believing the only thing needed for consumption was the coconut. So a few years later, in 1902, he bought an island plantation off the coast of Papua New Guinea, and there he would start his cult. He and his 15 German followers would live as nudists, worship the sun, and live entirely off of coconut meat and water, using other parts of the coconut as the only provisions. Now, this was a terrible idea. A lot of people died, and the ones who didn't fled one by one. Eventually, Engelhardt would be the only one left, and tourists would come to laugh at him. He'd die on the island at the age of 44. The group, as it was called the Order of the Sun, but to everyone at that time, it was Germany's coconut cult. Which, as crazy as it sounds, if you think about it, just makes it an extreme modern version of the kind of coconut worship that we've seen around the world since the Austronesians first left the Philippines. It might not be a complete diet, but it is a natural wonder. And to a primitive society, something that could provide so much in such a small package: drinking water, a source of food, sugar, firewood and sturdy timber, fiber for making rope or even clothing, oil for frying, vinegar for preserving, flour for making bread, even leaves for thatched roofs and shells as a utensil. I mean, this really was a gift from the gods. Find me any tropical country and I'll show you a place with a history built or altered by the coconut. It's honored with songs, legends, and religious offerings. It's the national symbol of the Maldives and a section of the crest on the flag of Fiji. In parts of East Africa, when a child is born, a coconut tree is planted, and until well into the 1900s, whole coconuts were the official currency of the Nicobar Islands. And love for the fruit isn't limited to the tropics. In the United States, coconuts are thrown to revelers during Mardi Gras, and it's said that it was Captain Bligh's harsh punishment for stealing coconuts that led to the rebellion on the HMS Bounty. In 1889, a British book identified 83 separate uses of the coconut, including stuffing for pillows and making blinders for bulls. And since then, the list has only grown. During World War II, scientists figured out that coconut water could substitute for human blood plasma. So in the Pacific Theater, sometimes it was an IV of coconut water that kept soldiers alive. By the 21st century, you could find coconut creams, oils, and cosmetics at any pharmacy or skincare shop. And at a liquor store, you could buy it distilled into rum or used as a flavoring. Hell, in 2008, it was used as biofuel to power a 747. But of course, most of all, there's the coconut's contribution to cuisine, giving us everything from massaman curry to Malaysian laksa, Swedish chocolate balls to Brazilian bambocado, Italian macaroons, and Sri Lankan coconut sambal. I can continue how many of the world's great foods rely on the coconut. Imagine a universe without mango sticky rice, beef rendang, cow soy, or that pina colada. Or a kitchen without something made from coconut, whether that's water, milk, cream, oil, flour, sugar, or the meat, fresh, dried, or desiccated. So who actually gets credit for the coconut? Well, since it floats, then we don't really know where it comes from. And since so many cultures played a role in its spread around the world, maybe the credit should go to the coconut itself. After all, it's the coconut that earned the name the tree that provides all necessities from ancient South India. The Malays call it the tree of 1,000 uses, and in the Philippines, it's the tree of life. So the next time you find yourself by a beach sipping a coconut for a few pennies, remember how priceless this simple fruit actually was for so many thousands of years. Subscribe to the channel for more from OTR. Thank you so much to everyone who supports us on Patreon. It makes this all possible. Find that link in the description along with our social media, and we'll see you next time.